son of Zadok the Kohen, Eliel Choref, and Achijah, son of Shisha, scribe, Yehoshaphat, son of Achiud, secretary, Ben-Allah, son of Yehoiada, over the army, Zadok and Abiathar Kohanim, Azariah, son of Nathan, over the commissioners, Zabud, the son of Nathan, senior minister, a friend of the king, Ahisha the chamberlain, and Adoniram, son of Abda, over the taxes. Shlomo has 12 commissions over all of Israel who sustain the king and his household. Each one sustained him 1 month of the year. These were their names: the son of Hur at Mount Ephraim.
The son of Hur sound familiar, by the way? Ben Hur.
Oh.
You familiar with the famous book? The novel and the movie, right? Ben Hur.
It's the same one?
He's the only one I know of in the Tanakh, so yeah. I don't know what makes him especially qualified to have a movie made of him, but you'd think there are people in the Tanakh that are more significant, but okay.
The son of Deker of Atmakatz, Shabin Bet Shemesh, and Edom Bet Hanan. The son of Hesed at Arubot, he was in charge of Soko at the entire land of Hefer. The son of Abinadab was in charge of the entire Dor district.
Well, Ben Hefer, the name ring a bell?
Ben Hefer Ben Yir Ben Menashe.
Son of Had Ben Hefer Ben Yir Ben Menashe. Yeah. So Had is the son of Hefer. So this is from Shevet Menashe. It's a part of the portion that apparently belonged to Menashe.
Okay. Tafat, daughter of Shlomo, became his wife. Bana, son of Achilud, Atanach, and Megiddo, and all of Bershean, which is near Zaretan, below Jezreel, from Bershean, until the plain of Meholah, until beyond Jokman. The son of Geber at Ramot Gilad, he was in charge of the villages of Yair, son of Menashe, in the Gilad.
How about what's mentioned at the end of Parashat Pinchas?
And he was in charge of He was in charge of the Argob region, which is in the Bashan, 60 great cities and walls and copper bars. Achimadab, son of Iddo, Machanaim. Achimaz Namsali, he also married Basemat, daughter of Shlomo. There is another.
Basemat but Ishmael.
Yeah.
Esau, one of his wives is Basemat but Ishmael.
So Shlomo called his daughter Basemat, like the daughter of Ephraim?
Yeah. We also have a Rabbi Ishmael in the Mishnah, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes someone is given a certain name that's very inauspicious, and that kind of almost predicts disaster, like Izebel or Ahab. Some of these names just don't sound Ishboshet. They don't sound Ikavod. Some of these names don't promise very much. Sometimes you wonder if some of these individuals had the potential for a certain future destiny in something positive, and they botched it. Which isn't to say that the name itself is a by definition unsuccessful name. Just that particular individual didn't get it right. So in the case of Ishmael, the way that he's named, he cries, his mother is crying, Hashem hears his tefillah to a certain extent. It's not that the name itself was, destined to fail. And in fact, if you look at a simple reading of Parashat Lech Lecha, Ishmael is a son of Abraham. Hashem has expectations of him, and he blows it. He botches it.
The name Abraham gave it.
Right, not in a bad way. He's not dooming him to failure. But it's one of those things that you have to take into consideration. Maybe, he was potentially he could have been a very good and productive member of society. Maybe the name itself was even the right name for him, or the right name at the right time. And for whatever reason, he blew it. It's not to say that the name is ruined forever. You want another interesting example of this? The name Yeshua. Rav Rekbi has a son, Yeshua, named after one of his grandparents. It's so the Sephardim in North Africa. In fact, I have a great uncle. Alav Shalom, he passed away just maybe 6-7 years ago. Yeshua Achai, my grandmother's brother. So, the name was a common name. It was a given name. There was one example of one that we didn't so easily get along with. And there's an example of others that were a little bit more, more positive. So sometimes you find someone with a kind of questionable name. It's not to say that we always encourage the giving of the name, but there are sometimes good examples of it too. Elisha is a tzaddik. Elisha ben Abuya. Right. Well, there at least the archetypal namesake was on the right side of it. Elisha ben Abuya had the potential for greatness and for glory, and he lived a very inglorious life. But maybe it's just, in that case, maybe it's just a very powerful name. Maybe powerful names don't sit well with everyone. Yeah. No one in the Mishnah or the Gemara names their children Moshe. It's a very common name nowadays. Nobody gives their kids that name in the period of the Mishnah. In the Talmud, there's one Moshe who appears in Masechet Shabbat, and he was an Am Haaretz. Yeah. It was apparently not a very popular name at the time, and you have to wonder why. In the Mishnah and the Gemara, there's no Rabbi Eliyahu. We have a Rabbi Pinchas, but Eliyahu, it's a pretty bombastic name. You have to wonder. I think there's a comment like this on the name Moshe by the Chidah Kadosh talks about this in the B'Shem Gedolim, where he goes through a list of the generations and different names in kind of alphabetical order, different Chachamim and Tzadikim. From different communities, and I think he actually comments on the fact that there are very few rabbis by the name of Moshe, and apparently in prior generations it was avoided as a name, and nowadays we use it, but back then it wasn't so commonly used. Adam also was not a very traditional name. In modern Hebrew, it's much more popular than it used to be. There are very few Rabbi Adams that we know about. By the Sephardim, I don't know any Sephardi community that used the name Hawa either. But the Ashkenazim, some of them did. Hanoch is one of those names that's also, we have at least 2 or 3 of them that sound like at least 2 of them are known tzaddikim, but it wasn't a common name. So I think it might be the Chidah Kadosh himself who says that there was such a tradition as not to name anybody after anyone who precedes Noach. And apparently Noach himself is on the border of whether or not it's recommendable, unless there's someone in a subsequent generation who has that name. The Metuvalim had such a tradition. To avoid the names of the first 10 generations, they're difficult, it's complicated. I never heard of a Metushelach, for example.
Shem comes after.
Yered also. Jared.
But that's also means Sam. That's actually a bad.
Yeah. Yarid in Hebrew is like a fair or a marketplace. Yarid Esfarim, I don't know.
What about Shem? The name Shem?
It would be Yered with a tzireh if it meant literally go down. But the name Shem, I have not come across very many. I can't think of anyone. Kings 1, it's chapter 4.
9, page 809.
What's unique about this particular basmat is that it was a bad name to begin with.
That's right, that's what I'm saying.
The daughter of Potiphar? Potiphar. I believe we hold Basmat was the one of the wives of Esau. He married Ishmael's daughter, basically a first cousin of his. Ishmael is his father's half brother, and he marries a cousin, a first cousin, a paternal first cousin. A few, yeah. Right. I mean, yeah. No, that's first cousins. It's not illegal, even in America.
Really?
Yeah, nothing closer than a first cousin, but yeah. It can perpetuate certain genetic deficiencies. Yeah, but it was commonly done in up until very recent history. Okay. Anyway.
Bana sono Hushai in Asher e in Bealot. What?
Hushai.
Hushai in Asher and Bealot. Yehoshaphat, son of Paruach in Issachar. Shimei, son of Elah in Benjamin. Geber, son of Puri in the land of Gilad, the land of Sichon, king of Amorai, and of all the king of Bashan, and one main commissioner who was over the entire land. Judah and Israel were numerous, like the sand that is by the sea, for multitude, eating, drinking, and rejoicing.
Okay, so the Jews are in a period of relative prosperity. You'll find very often, in fact, it's a halachic catchphrase, like Kishlomo Bishat Malchuto. When the Jewish nation is prosperous, as they were under the reign of Shlomo Melech, for example, the Gemara says we don't accept converts. Meaning, in theory, we'd have to be very diligent about making sure they're converting for the right reasons, because when we're living prosperously, there's obviously more than one reason why other people might want to be like us. On the contrary, when we're living in periods of persecution, oppression, anti-Semitism, it's the historical tendency was to be much more lenient than we are today with processes of conversion. Much more. I mean, just saying I want to be Jewish in front of 3 people was probably enough to get yourself crucified or executed or beheaded in most countries. Think Catholic Europe and Christian and Muslim North Africa, the Middle East. So Sephardi communities, it's funny because to this day there exists a very lingering machloket. Rav Ben Zion Uziel, the first Sephardi chief rabbi of Israel, was historically very lenient, kind of traditionally lenient with converts. A lot of what people believe is traditional Sephardic leniency or a kind of lax approach to conversion is out of context. To this day, the Rabbanut has an issue with one Sephardi rabbi on the Upper West Side and his conversions, where he'll claim that traditionally Sephardim were more lenient and less strict, less scrutinizing, let's say, of certain aspects of the lives of their potential converts. But that's an anachronism. Living in the free food, it's worth it just for that. But that's an anachronism, because if you were living in a Muslim country where telling someone that you want to be Jewish is punishable by death, even if you didn't carry it out, you know, it's a much more compelling piece of evidence in favor of acceptance of a convert than living in New York City and having a congregant who has a cute secretary that he wants to marry. It doesn't necessarily tell you anything about this person, the authenticity of the request for conversion. Is what it is.
But in that country they would kill you because that would be like a martyrdom?
Yeah, it's apostasy. In fact, there were periods of time in Russia, Lithuania, and Poland where the local Batei Din refused to officiate local conversions. They would tell you if you want to be converted, they'll give you an interview process, they might teach you a little bit, and they say, okay, we're not officiating this, we're going to send you with a teudah that you're going to take to a Beit Din in another country, and there they'll convert you. Because if the Catholics found out there was, or even the Orthodox in some cases, they found out there was a Jewish tribunal that was converting people, they would have executed the whole Jewish community. What they call apostasy. So you had a famous situation where the Vilna Gaon in Lithuania, the Beit Din converted someone. They threatened him with death. He was apparently someone important in the government, and he went through with it anyway, and they killed him. And the Vilna Gaon said that this man was a giant in terms of the zechuyot that he had for going through with this. I think he insisted on having his conversion done in Lithuania without leaving the country, and I think they recommended against it. In the end, they did it, and he was executed publicly for doing so. Not so simple. So again, are you comparing Spain when it was under Muslim control, Spain when it was under fanatic Catholic control, or the community around the 70s on the Upper West Side? You know, you'd have a very, very tough case to make, saying that someone who wants to convert today should be granted any exemptions or dispensations.
I think they should convert more.
That's it.
There's not enough Jewish men to be
Box them all out, right. Unfortunately. That or they should convert a lot more non-Jewish men. That or they should convert a lot more non-Jewish
They
men.
have like all these Asian women converting because they want like English men. But they don't have all these Asian men converting.
Maybe they're really into octopus.
It's unbalanced.
And imbalance, yeah. Don't know. I mean, yeah. I don't know that they take those statistics into account when they actually do it.
They don't.
So then you have the Syrians who don't accept converts of any kind. And I think they've warmed up to Ashkenaziyot over the past 100 years. Maybe they're a little bit more.
Syrians always marry Syrians.
I don't know. I think less so this generation. Yeah.
So I
So,
don't understand something.
yeah.
We just had Tisha B'Av,
mhm.
which is so devastating. How come that this is what we're studying?
We're just going through the book from the beginning to the end. There's a lot of fascinating details and characters in it. Last week we actually fast forwarded to the very end of Melachim Bet, and we read the account of the destruction of Beit HaMikdash inside, which I think is meaningful around Shabbat.
How do we know, how do we really know that the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash is because of us, and not because the Romans came?
We had about a dozen prophets tell us that was the case.
How far in advance did they tell us?
Number of years,
Somehow nobody listened to them.
because there were prophets and they were telling people things they didn't want to hear. Nobody listens to me if it makes you feel any better.
But they were prophets, so do they have any respect for prophets?
The answer is no, they killed them.
Really?
They killed Ishaya, they killed Yirmiyah, they killed, Gedaliah ben Achicha. Oh, Zechariah was assassinated. Yeah, in fact, a pretty solid percentage of our prophets that were actually assassinated.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, they were prophets, they weren't immortal or
Why
invincible.
did they call them?
Because people are jerks. You're surprised. People are jerks. People do and say crazy things. No one likes unsolicited advice. No one likes to be told what to do. And for a prophet to publicly castigate large groups of people for their iniquity is not going to add years onto their lives. It is what it is. In fact, Yirmiyah is warned at the very beginning of his prophetic career, don't you be afraid or I'll give you what to fear. Don't cower before them or I'll make you a coward in front of them. Your job is to tell people things they have no desire whatsoever to hear. And in the case of Yirmiyah, he prophesied the destruction. He writes about it in very vivid detail. The Book of Lamentations, Echa, was written by him before the destruction. Yeah, he was killed in the period of destruction. So, no joke. But just because someone's a prophet doesn't mean that people listen to them. People listen to Moshe. There's no precedent for people ignoring a prophet. I mean, if anything, we have more by way of evidence of prophets being ignored than we have of them being listened to, which should make you feel a lot better. Distressing as that is, it's pretty bad. Yeah.
And maybe they should have said something more uplifting together without doing the destruction.
That's a very Hasidic approach. No offense. Yeah. Or you have the Kiddush, and yeah. I'll tell you something that's very classically Sephardi, is that the Sephardim don't really deviate much from the Tanakh. So you'll find that the Musar movement is very hard on rebuke and castigation and chastisement and self-improvement. Lots of Musar, that's what they call themselves, the Musar movement, which was really just the non-Hasidic response to Hasidism. oh, we don't need Hasidism and its new teachings. Why? Because we have old ones that can teach us to be hard on ourselves and critical of ourselves. The Hasidic movement was much more about being, open, warm, welcoming, encouraging, hospitable, charitable, active, and actively engaged in other people's lives. And you're missing something. There's a degree of spiritual malnutrition that you can ascribe to people only learning positive things. There's something that's missing in your life. If you can't hear negativity, right? So the Sephardim will point you back to the Tanakh and say, there's some really harsh chapters there, right? Like, we needed to be told in no uncertain terms that what we were doing was crazy, and in very, very vivid and gory detail. Like, comparing the nation to a prostitute is pretty harsh. It's not a flattering, in any generation that was never a flattering comparison, but we get that. We got quite a bit of it, The detail, the allegorical comparisons are pretty harsh. There is such a thing. There is a time and a place for some harsh realities, Truth doesn't necessarily care about your feelings. It's the truth. So it's true, the Hasidim are right, that if you want to introduce Torah concepts to somebody who's totally uninitiated, you need to find a way to work into their heart before they even take you seriously and would be willing to consider anything you have to say, let alone rebuke that no one wants to hear. But sooner or later, there's a time and a place for it. There was a disciple, a Talmud of the Vilna Gaon, who once quoted him as saying that one of his major concerns about Hasidut was that he was afraid that there was a childish immaturity that goes along with always hearing, Hashem loves you, it's all going to be fine, everything's okay, I'll take care of it. But there were times when we got clobbered. Like Beit HaMikdash needed to be destroyed twice because we just weren't receptive to the negative message. I don't know that a more positive, encouraging message would have changed the outcome. Lesich Fragen, as they say, it's a question that allows itself to be asked. I don't know that the outcome would have been any different. If the Magid Mezrich or the Balatanya were there in the period of the destruction, who is to tell me they would be taken any more seriously than prophets that have been canonized for perpetuity? That's a powerful comparison. They managed to save many hundreds of thousands, at this point millions of lives, by getting people re-inspired and rekindled onto Torah. I just don't know that the Nevi'im were wrong in rebuke. That's a pretty classical Christian response, in fact. The Christians reacted very poorly over the years to what they consider the God of the Old Testament. You ever hear any of this in Italy? An Old Testament punishment?
It's the perception that the God
of the Old Testament
is
vindictive and harsh and cruel and unforgiving and demanding and technically demanding and scrutinizing because all these little mitzvot that we have. You never heard such a thing? It's like an Old Testament punishment. It's like.
But I'm not saying that it shouldn't have been harsh at all. I'm just saying that if people are doing really, really bad things, and you give them a little, something by which they can feel that they could change and they would feel better by changing instead of feeling worse by changing.
Well, you get that. Yirmiyah has some more upbeat prophecies. They are not the majority of the book, let's be clear. But you get some of that. Yeshaya is towards the end much more upbeat. Most of it, in fact, is of the more positive kind. He's prophesying the redemption before the destruction took place.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He died. He was assassinated. He was killed with a sword to the face. That was.
By Jews?
I don't remember specifically if it was an inside job or if it was the process of the destruction. I don't believe he lived that far, which will lead me, if I remember correctly, he was killed by Jews because the destruction. He died before the destruction. Yirmiyah died after the destruction. And himself is also killed. And Zechariah was definitely before.
Because they took samples.
And Zechariah was killed, in fact, that's for sure. Nebuchadnezzar, when he marched in the Beit HaMikdash, he could still see the blood where he was killed. Like the floor was still. Yeah. So Yeshaya died before the destruction itself took place, but he prophesies about the impending redemption, meaning he's already a step ahead. He's telling you, true, Beit HaMikdash will be destroyed, and you deserve it. And that's how the book begins. But it concludes on an overwhelmingly upbeat, positive note. Hashem loves us, He'll collect us, regather us from all the exiles, bring us back to our land. We'll be back on good terms and on like a first name basis. So but you're talking about looking back. This is like 2,500 years into the future. It still hasn't happened. That would have been mighty powerful to be able to predict that to the year, but it also depends on us and our free will, so it's a little bit hard to say. So the Jews, Judea, the rest of the land of Israel, the nation, are very many, like grains of sand on the coast of the sea, on the beach. That's how many. Eating and drinking and happy. So there's no shortages. The very end of the 4th chapter, yes. Chapter 4, verse 20. You want to pick it up from there and start chapter 4?
Okay, Solomon ruled over all the kingdoms from the Euphrates River to the Philistines and toward the border of Egypt. They had brought tributes and served all the nations. Solomon's provision for 1 day was 30 corn of fine flour, 60 corn of flour, 10 fat goats, 20 oxen full of pasture, and 100 sheep and goats, besides gazelle, deer, yak, and fattened cow. For he ruled over the entire area beyond the Euphrates River from Tipsah to Gaza.
Until Gaza. Is Gaza right? Okay, strip. What do you mean it was a part of biblical Israel? What do you mean it was a part of biblical Israel? Gaza was part of biblical Israel. Just to be clear about this.
Oh, I have to tell you a quick joke. This is very funny. There's this guy who wrote a book called Catch the Jew. And it shows how all these different situations with the Europeans and the Palestinians, they design all these contrived situations to make Israelis look bad and to work on the media. So he was talking to some taxi driver, some Arab taxi driver taking him someplace in Jerusalem, and he says and they thought he was German, because he is German, but he's Israeli German.
Right.
And he talks as if he's German, so they'll really tell him what they really think. So the cab driver thinks he's German, and he says to him, Palestine really belongs to the Palestinians because we have been here for 14,000 years. 14,000 years. So he says to him, you've been here 14,000 years? He says, 14,000 years. So he says, the Jews have been here 40,000 years.
Some people are a bit hard to reason with.
It comes out of their mouth, it's true.
Yeah. I will point out, by the way, Rashi's explanation of Barburim Abusim is fattened birds, right? So the Hebrew word for fattened is mifutam. Mifutam meaning what? Pituma katoret. Lifatem et katoret is like to crush by stuffing with a mortar and pestle.
Yeah.
So the practice of force-feeding birds goes back thousands of years.
Wow, that's so terrible.
This is not it's not a new practice. It's in order to get birds fatty and make them grow faster, they used to force feed them. This is not a new concept by any stretch of the imagination. Yeah. Evus technically is like a trough or a muzzle that the animals feed out of. So birds. In fact, Babur, if I'm not mistaken, is translated elsewhere as swans. So swans, for us, swans are perfectly kosher.
They are?
Absolutely. Yeah. The Rabbi Zerach Halevi talks about this. He says that any bird with webbed feet and a flat yellow-orange bill is kosher by definition. So duck is tasty. Goose is even tastier. Swans are like the best.
Swans are so beautiful. They're supposed to grow up.
They're beautiful, but they're tasty. I think there's some really ringneck pheasant. Peacocks, peafowl are kosher. Ashkenazim have issues with it, but the Sephardim, they're pheasants.
Swans can be very beautiful, but they can also be very nasty.
Eat the nasty ones.
They snap at you.
Well, go ahead. Then take a bite. Anyway, so verse 4. Oh, sorry, Tisach Adonai, yes? Right.
So he moved over the Torah area beyond the Euphrates to Side to Gaza of the Balkans, and the area beyond the Euphrates River, and he was at peace with the lands on all sides round about, Judah and Israel dwell in security. Each had under his grapevine, and under his fig tree, from Dan to Beersheba, all the days of Solomon. Solomon had
Very prosperous time.
I like each one under his grapevine.
Yeah.
Sounds so great.
It's not just that people had money, they were self-sufficient. They had their own grapes, raisins, wine. You know, they would dry the grapes and the figs for sustenance over the winter, so you were taken care of. If you had a fig tree and a grape tree, and a grapevine, and you knew how to preserve either as wine or as raisins, you had how to survive through the winter. That's it. Yeah.
Solomon had 40,000 stalls of 40,000 stalls of horses, chariots, wow, and 12,000 horsemen. These commissioners sustained King Solomon and all who came to Solomon's table, each in his assigned month. They did not leave anything lacking.
Rabbi, sorry, so how does it work? The commissioners, the way that described are that with different functions, but then each of them was just for a month.
Apparently, his own personal accountants or his own personal life managers, he took one from each tribe. Everybody should feel represented. No tribe should feel left out. Yeah, I guess it was just a part. It was a full-time job for once a month. Not bad.
The barley and the straw for the horses and the speedy mounts they would bring to whatever place they were quartered, each one providing it according to his responsibility. God gave wisdom and considerable understanding to Solomon, and rapid part as immense as the sand which is upon the seashore. Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all the people of the East and all the wisdom of Egypt. He was wiser than all men, and Ethan the Ezrahite, and Heman and Kalkal and Gerda, the sons of Machal. His fame spread to all the nations around him, and he spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005.
You do know that we have several hundred proverbs recorded in the book of Proverbs. That's what we have on record. The Gemara says that there's actually what wasn't recorded was what was much deeper and even more difficult to decipher. The proverbs that we have are like the lowest of the low level ones.
But it sounds like you use them by heart.
No. In order for a proverb to make sense, it has to be witty and pithy and original.
Who was Machal? It says, Haman and Kalkal and Gerda, the sons of Machal.
Yeah, so the way Rashi describes them is they were known to be able to conduct or to compose the various mizmorim, the various songs of praise of God, b'mcholot shiur, with tof mahol, like percussion and song, maybe harmony. So Bnei Machol doesn't necessarily mean the sons of Machol. It might refer, according to that explanation, those who are learned or facile in Machol, which would be composition, maybe. Yeah. So the Levim would sing from these songs, composers of the Tehillim.
He spoke of Israel's, he spoke 3,000 Proverbs, the songs were 1,005, he spoke of the trees, but from the cedar which is in Lebanon down to the hyssop which grows out of the wall. He spoke of animal, of fowl.
Rashi explains that he was an expert in what medicinal properties each one of these trees and plants have. So cedar is a mighty tree that grows north of Israel and Lebanon. And hyssop grows out of the cracks in
Hyssop is actually really good for your lungs.
Hyssop.
I once got this concentrated hyssop aromatherapy, and it actually opened up my lungs. It was kind of like congestion.
So if I'm not mistaken, Izov in Hebrew is Zatar. It's the oregano thyme family.
Really?
Yeah. About Izov. Hyssop, I don't know that we have a separate species identified as such, but oregano and thyme grow wild in Israel.
Well, hyssop smells totally different from oregano.
Could be, maybe there's more than one interpretation of what it is. But
Spring of animal, fowl, common creature with habitation, and came from all the nations to be the husband of Solomon. Many series found all the kings of the land and Hiram, king of Tyre, sent his servants to Solomon. For he had heard that he had been anointed king in place of his father, for Hiram had always been a friend of David. Solomon sent back to Hiram saying, "We knew that my father David was not able to build the house for the name of Hashem his God, because of the war that surrounded them, until Hashem was subdued for our enemies under the soles of my feet. And now Hashem my God has granted me rest on all sides, there is no adversary and no misfortune. Therefore I have decided to build a house for the name of Hashem my God, as Hashem spoke to my father David, saying, your son, whom I shall place upon your throne and your stand, he will build a house for my name. And now command your servants that they cut down cedars for me from Lebanon, and your servants will be...
so Tzor is the Lebanon area, and it's probably part of Turkey.
Which is?
Tzor, Tyre, Tyre.
I thought Tyre is supposed to be... One of my students used to point out to me, she said to me, Tyre is supposed to be like a place of the devil. Christian.
Could be in Christian theology.
It's in Lebanon, right?
It would be Tzor would be somewhere between Lebanon, maybe modern day Turkey. Yeah. In other words, between Lebanon and perhaps eastern Turkey. It was probably much bigger than Lebanon is today. Yeah. So right, it might also be the etymological origin of tyranny.
Oh, yeah.
Tzor in Hebrew, which is interesting, you have like tzorah, tzorot, mitzer, limits or boundaries. So tyranny might be like ruling over someone the way they did in Tzor, which wouldn't be flattering if that's the case.
Okay, so, and I will provide with the wages of your servants according to whatever you say. For you know that we have no one who knows how to hew down trees like these Sidonians. And it was when Hiram heard the words of Solomon, he was very glad and said, blessed is Hashem, this man who has granted David a wise son, rule over this numerous people.
Plus, it was great that he was going to be providing all the lumber. But he certainly sounds excited.
Hiram sent a message to Solomon saying, I received what you sent me. I shall do all your desire in cedar wood and cypress wood. My servants will bring the logs down from Lebanon to the sea. I will make them into rafts on the sea to go to the place that you shall appoint for me. I will dismantle from them there, and you will carry them away. And you do what I desire, providing food for my household. Hiram will give Solomon cedar wood and cypress wood as much as he desired, and Solomon will give Hiram 20,000 core of wheat as sustenance for his household, and 20 core of squeezed oil. This is what Solomon will give Hiram gift by year. It's like up to the one
Yes. Apparently, I mean, he could certainly trade it in if he needed to. So, let's put a bookmark in here. I want to do the Midrash. Just this happens to be a Haftarah.
We finished the chapter already?
How far are we from the end?
We've almost finished the chapter 5. We're almost at the end of chapter
Okay,
5.
sure, let's do that. Go ahead.
Solomon had built the temple of
We skipped something.
Hashem gave wisdom to Shlomo.
Shlomo. with Hiram and Solomon. The two of them sealed a covenant. King Solomon imposed a levy from all of Israel, a levy consisting of 30,000 men. He would send them to Lebanon with ships of 10,000 each, not from They would get Lebanon and 50 months, each would be a month. Archbishop Brown was in charge of the levy. It's a little bit like a tax. Solomon had 70,000 who carried burdens of 80,000 each and a mountain. In addition to Solomon's 3,300 officers who were appointed to work, which directed the people performing the work. The king commanded that they quarried great stones, heavy stones, to lay the foundation of the temple, with hewn stones. The builders of Solomon, the builders of Hiram, and the Gibeonites.
Right, Gibeon. I know a Taimani family, last name Ghibli. Could well be from there. Jabal in Arabic is a mountain. The last name is Ghibli.
B-L-I. B-R-I.
Ghibli with an L. Yeah. Ghibli, also in Arabic, Ghibli is give me. Yeah.
So the builders of Hiram and the Gibeonites carried the stones, they prepared the wood and the stones to build the temple.
Bring something to me. There. Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah, a few more verses. We're done with the chapter.
Oh, we finished this chapter.
Oh, I'm sorry, did it? Yeah.
We finished this chapter.
It goes really fast in the big print, yes. Right. So they prepared all the trees and all the stones for Beit HaMikdash. We'll continue from here next week with the conclusion of the construction. Take a quick...
I once had a Turkish student, and I was talking about why you crush the glass, like the wine glass at a wedding. It's supposed to, like, the little piece is supposed to represent the destruction of the temple. And we do it at a wedding to remember that even though we have our greatest joy, we still have to remember we have to go and rebuild the temple. So it can't be totally joyful.
Right.
So this totally non-Jewish Turkish student says to me, it's terrible, why don't they rebuild the temple now? He really said it like it bothered him so much.
That's great. I don't know how to pause the recording there, but absolutely drink it.
Thank you.
No, sorry, we're continuing the format of the Midrash.
Oh.
We'll take a quick break.
Very, very funny. Like, he's very emotional and expressive and funny. And he's like very down to earth. He said, some people feel like if they study Gemara all day and all night, it's like the best. But on the other hand, if their wife is at home and struggling with 10 kids or 6 kids and she wants them to help her, and she says, I need you to come home and help me. And he says, yeah, but if I close this page of Gemara, it's like I'm turning my back on God or something, right? So he says, you don't get it. The whole point of studying Gemara is to make you into a better person. The more you make a better person, by ignoring all your kids and your whole family.
It's really easy to be holy when you're doing your own thing and beholden to no one.
He said like a lot of stuff that's like really good. And the thing is that he used to be totally secular. Like, I met his wife, they have 4 Catholics. So I met his wife, I met in the army, and he shows you on his website, he had tattoos on his arm. It was like far off, somewhere. And then he became like a very African colored character with his down to his knees. Wow. And so were all his little kids.
Total transformation.
So funny.
Very good. So we're going to move on with the Midrash. So you can have a cell phone in mind. I can read and translate. It's Midrash in this week's parasha. Pretty fascinating. It's on the topic really of the same fate befalling good and bad people.
The same what?
The same fate. So for fate, like the same end. So for example, this week's parasha being by Hanan, V'atchanan Hashem. So Moshe praised Hashem. What does the pasuk say? By the way, whenever we come across a pasuk in the Midrash assumes you know it, and it helps sometimes to go back and read it, or to even read the whole chapter just to get a better picture of what's going on. V'atchanan Hashem b'etahi lemor, and I begged God at that very time, saying, there's a bit of an introduction, but basically this is the introduction to a long prayer in which Moshe concludes that he would love to see the land that was promised to the Jewish nation. He'd like to be able to experience it firsthand. So, it's a pasuk in Eov where he says, it comes down to this. There's one thing over which I said, both the perfect and the wicked he's destroying by Hashem. What does he mean to say? Incidentally, there's an opinion that Eov was Moshe. Amar Moshe said, Ribono shel olam, creator, master of the universe. Ahati, hakol showin lefanecha. It comes down to the same thing. Everybody's equal before you, meaning you give the same punishments to the righteous and the wicked. So similarly, you find Shlomo HaMelech said, "Hakol kasher lakol, mikra echad atzik v'darasha." The pasuk in Kohelet. Everything as applies to all. The same thing happens to the tzaddik and to the rasha, which is not very encouraging. We would like to believe that tzaddikim win the lottery, and the rashaim suffer terribly. So we have a few examples here. The tzaddik is a Noah. So the example of the tzaddik is Noah. What's the story with Noah? Rabbi Pinchas b'shem Rabbi Yochanan b'shem Rabbi Eliezer b'no shel Rabbi Yosef Galili Omer. So Rabbi Pinchas, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Rabbi Yosef Galili, said like this: Noah, im kshu yotze min hateva, hikisho ha'ari ushvaro. Noah, when he was leaving the ark, was bitten by a lion and broke apparently one of his legs. And as such, an individual who has a broken leg is no longer able to, because a sacrifice wouldn't be accepted that way, the sacrificer needs to avoid doing any sacrificial work until the wound is healed. So if you have a freshly broken leg, you cannot work in Beit HaMikdash as a Kohen. Similarly, an animal in that state could be offered as a sacrifice. He was no longer fit to offer a sacrifice. So Shem, his son, offered the sacrifice in his stead. So who's the other half of this pasuk from Mishlei? This is Paro the cripple. At the time when he wanted to sit on Shlomo's throne, he didn't know its mers, how it functions. And there was a lion on the throne that bit him and broke his leg as well. That's why he was handicapped. Unclear if this is a live lion that was, for whatever reason, part of, caged under the throne, or if it was one of the engraved lions that actually miraculously punished him for doing what he did. May well be. Stranger things have happened. Look at the political candidates for this year's presidential election. Stranger things have happened. Yeah. So that's the story with Paro Nechum. So he's an example where, compared to Noah, they both had broken legs. They're both bitten by lions, and one is a righteous man who saved the entire earth, and one of them was a pretty wicked man who tried to destroy it. Zemet Tzulea. Sorry, Vizemet Tzulea. This one died with a terrible limp, and this one died with a terrible limp. They both suffered from the same issue. Noah and Paro Nechum, who lived the same generation of Shlomo, a different ruler of Egypt, yeah. The crippled ruler of Egypt. So, this one died with a limp, that one died with a limp. Latov, continuation of the pasuk. This is a reference to Moshe, as it is said, Vatera Tokito, who his mother saw him and she saw that he was good. What did she see in him that she knew he was good? She saw that he was born circumcised, which was an indication that he was, a cut above the rest. Latahor, so those who are pure, this is Aharon, Shemetaher Aboratem Shel Israel, who purifies the sins of the Jewish nation. Latameh, those are the Meraglim. Those are the spies that Moshe sent into the land. Instead of purifying us from our sins, they increased them. Elu Amru, Shibcha Shel Eretz Israel. So Moshe and Aharon, they did nothing but speak good about the land of Israel. Elu Amru Ginutah Shel Eretz Israel. And the others, the spies, spoke only negativity about Israel. Elu Lo Nichasu La'aretz, Ve'elu Lo Nichasu. Neither these nor they made it into the land of Israel. So wait a second. Moshe and Aharon, who spent their entire prophetic careers trying to convince us that we should want to make Aliyah and go to Eretz Israel, and at the end of the day, their rewards, their efforts were met with what reward? That they were locked out of the land of Israel and they couldn't go. The Meraglim, who spoke so ill and such evil about Israel, ended up getting punished, and in fact, they were buried in the desert the same way Moshe and Aharon were. Sounds fair?
And the irony is that Moshe constant argument, and quote-unquote argument with God is, don't do this because you don't want to be perceived unjust to that.
What will the Egyptians say? What will our enemies say? Right.
So he keeps saying that to God, and the irony is he ended up having, according to the there's the same destiny of.
He met the same fate. So he advocated for Israel his entire life, and he ended up getting locked out. And the Meraglim, who for a very short period were so toxic and so poisonous that they discouraged the entire nation from going, and they too were locked out. But at the end of the day, they met the same fate. How is it possible? How could you tolerate this without getting spiritual out?
He said that the reason Moshe wasn't allowed to go wasn't because of him or because of something that he did. But because of his merit, if the whole Am Yisrael had gone in, they would have been able to stay and never had to leave. But they were not on that level. So in other words, he can go in because they weren't on that level. Because otherwise they would have stayed as a result of his merit, not their own.
Right. Basically, they met the same fate. A very conspicuous and prominent, and it's a matter of public record. We know that the Meraglim died as in the aftermath of a plague that befell the nation right after their false report. And we know that Moshe died very explicitly and was not granted the right to enter the land. It was decreed against him, and he knew this, that it wasn't going to happen. Nonetheless, he begs over it, he prays for it. To put the Midrash in perspective, there are situations in life in which you're potentially drawn to the wrong conclusion. We started with a pasuk from Eov, and Eov had a very, very bitter experience and came to question God and came to question divine providence and had a very hard time getting himself back on track. The Midrash is not telling you that they met the same fate for the same reasons. In fact, it's drawing a comparison, drawing a contrast, and telling you, you should know that it's ironic that Moshe and Aharon and the spies all died in the desert, because Moshe and Aharon fought their entire lives, they spent their whole careers pushing for this, advocating, wanting to make it happen. And the Meraglim were terribly fearful of it and discouraged the entire nation. How does that make sense? That they all met the same fate. You're tempted, like Eov, to draw the wrong conclusion. That's it. To be a tzaddik, to be a rasha, it's all the same. You're going to meet the same punishment anyway. Eat, drink, and be merry, because we're only here temporarily. We're all going to end up in the same place. But when it comes to these particular deaths, or tortures, a few other examples in the Midrash we don't have time to get into, you're bizarrely left to draw that conclusion. If no one told me otherwise, I would understand that, of course. The spies died in Egypt, Moshe died in the desert, Moshe and Aaron died in the desert. At the end of the day, either there's no justice, or somehow that was justice, but it's justice hard for us to see.
there is a difference between they might have to share the same faith in this world, but their reward and what to come would be different.
You could. What you would lose is anyone who doesn't understand that concept.
Right.
I will never be convinced by someone who believes that you give me bad in this world in order to give me good in the world to come, and I come out ahead. I would just as soon tell you, okay, so I'm going to cash out of my options now. Let me live a good, peaceful life over here. What happens at Olam Haba? I mean, who knows? But you're missing something huge. You're basically saying the fact that Moshe and Aharon died at a particular time in a particular place is effectively there must be a message that's being conveyed there. It's not an accident. If I didn't know how or why they died or when, I might come to a bunch of different conclusions. But knowing for a fact that the Torah tells you Aharon died in a particular place at a particular time, Moshe died in a particular place at a particular time, we don't know where his burial place is. We know for a fact that he's dead though. He passed away before they entered the land. How does this make sense? Let me put it to you this way. What was the attitude of the Meraglim towards the land of Israel?
It was overwhelming and everything was gigantic.
The land was gigantic, the giants are going to consume us, there's no chance that we can live there or eke out a living. There are other nations that are dwelling there aside from the ones that we saw. We should turn around and go back to Egypt. We need security. We don't need independence and responsibility, we need security. Moshe and Aharon, how would you describe their attitude towards Eretz Yisrael? Towards Eretz Yisrael.
Well, they didn't disagree with it. They just felt that with the help of God they can turn it around.
Did they ever give you an indication that they had anything but love for the land of Israel? And did they ever even allude to their desire not to go to Israel? So how does this make sense? You may or may not recall, a few years ago, we talked about reward and punishment in the Morning Muchim, the Guide to the Perplexed. And one of the things that we discussed was midah keneged midah, punishments fitting crimes. And I mentioned that there's a Gemara, here's the example the Rambam gives, of one of the officers at the time of Elisha, we'll see this in Sefer Malachim, who the people were starving. There was no wheat, there was no barley, there was no rain, and people had nothing to eat. They were literally about to die of starvation. Elisha, the prophet, gets up and he says, in the name of God, you're all going to see that tomorrow you'll be able to buy basically a bushel of wheat for a very negligible price and a bushel of barley for half the price. Historically, wheat traded for 2 times the price of barley because people eat it in more consistent demand. Barley you can use for beer, for malt, for whiskey, but not every culture had that. So the story with Elisha's officer is that when he hears Elisha say this, there was no wheat and no barley anywhere in the land of Israel. The only place that it did end up coming from, and this is ironic because this is the source the Gemara gives us for all sorts of midah keneged midah, of righteous and just punishments. Elisha tells him, wait a second. He gets all indignant and he says, there's no way this is going to happen. It's like you're giving the people a false sense of security. Elisha's response to him is what? You're going to see this miracle of God's with your eyes, and you will not eat from it. So what happened was that the Aramean army got petrified. They thought that the Jews were about to attack them, and they left a massive store of wheat and barley.
Wow.
So that was discovered when they went to discover this camp. When the Mitzoraim, the lepers, were outside, they saw these massive stores of grains. They came back to the nation, told them, here, look what we found, etc. So how is that midah keneged midah? Because you didn't believe, you the officer didn't believe in what I told you in the name of God was going to happen, the only fitting response, the only fitting punishment is you don't deserve to benefit from it. Which copies over exactly to the Meraglim. They don't believe in the miracles that Hashem said He would do. They don't believe in the land being the place for us. They don't believe in our ability to live in the land, to fight for it, to defend it, etc. it's only fitting that not only will you see from Olam HaEmet, from the world of truth, that all this will come true, but you're not going to benefit from it. Fine, that's justice. Because they did what they did. They don't deserve to go into the land of Israel. In the case of Moshe and Aaron, the one thing that was most precious to them, the one thing they wanted more than anything else, was to enter the land of Israel. And because there was this discussion, again, on purpose, by accident, one is led to believe this was more intentional than unintentional. Because this was the one super most important thing on their minds that they were interested in and that they struggled for their entire lives, it was withheld from them as a punishment. So the Meraglim died and they were punished because they disbelieved in the miracles of what happened. Moshe and Aharon, who were tzaddikim, who were righteous men, who spread the love of God and the faith in God and a respect and appreciation for these prophetic messages, they don't go to the land because it was the one thing that was most precious to them, and they refused to make a Kiddush Hashem when Hashem told them, I'll make water come out of this boulder. They hit it with the staff instead of speaking to it. And so, in their case, for someone on their level, ironically, there could be no greater punishment than telling them, your lives as prophets were great, your prophecies are fantastic, they're recorded for posterity, you still can't go to the land. And you can't go because I gave you the opportunity to sanctify my name in front of the entire Jewish nation, which is the purpose of Eretz Israel. And because you botched it, because you decided to hit the stone instead of speaking to it, according to Zohar, that was on purpose. The punishment that you're going to get is that which you were striving for so seriously. In other words, because you hold something so precious, it's the difference between being punished at a high level and being punished at a low level. Being punished on a low level was Hashem telling them, you guys disbelieved, you guys didn't have emunah, you're going to see it and you're not going to benefit from it. Because you don't believe in it, you don't deserve to benefit from it. That's midah k'neged midah. Midah k'neged midah for the tzaddikim is on a much higher level. And the punishments are much more exacting. And so, to put it in other words, the Meraglim, the one thing they had the least respect for, and that they cared for the least, and didn't even calculate into their order of priorities, they ended up having withheld from them because it was something that was so precious. They learned a lesson, so to speak. Moshe and Aharon, who were supposed to know better, Moshe and Aharon, who was representatives of prophecy, it's great that you love Eretz Israel, but you should know better than this. When Hashem tells you to do something, you do it. Whether or not you believe there's something else for you to accomplish. Maybe the Zohar says, could be they were afraid that if they did sanctify and glorify the name of God by speaking to the boulder instead of hitting it, many members of the nation would have died on the spot as a punishment for disbelieving in such things. So Moshe's thought was, if I can do something as simple as hit this boulder but make water come out of it, I will have gained the respect of the nation, I will have shown them that I can do miracles, but maybe that wasn't the point. In fact, maybe the entire point of Eretz Israel was the humility. The Meraglim are a very funny example. He was very humble. In this particular case, maybe what he did was super humble. He was so humble that he actually sacrificed. He gave up on the one thing that was most precious to him, his whole life. He's dreaming of Eretz Israel, and he gave up on it to show you what a tzaddik he was. Where he might have hit the boulder on purpose so as not to bring a tremendous judgment against the Jewish nation. And in doing so, he's basically telling you, how righteous and how humble can a human being be? The one thing that I've always wanted, the thing I've been prophesying about myself, unfortunately I'm shut out of. I can't.
I don't understand why the whole nation, if he had not hit the stone, why would the whole nation suffer?
His fear, according to Zohar, was that this stone is an inanimate object, and I can speak to it, it'll do what I tell it to. You are animate objects, you, the entire nation of Israel, and you can't be reasoned with. And I can't speak to you, and I can't expect you to do or understand anything that I tell you. So, the Meraglim, who were the lowest of the low, end up getting punished with something that was so valuable and precious they didn't even care, and they didn't even think twice about. And so what more fitting a punishment than for them not to benefit from it? Moshe and Aharon, who knew how precious it is, who knew how important it is, end up being punished because relative to their level, it was a direct disobedience, an act of disobedience against God. If you love Eretz Israel and you appreciate what it can do, you shouldn't have made it a bargaining chip. You shouldn't have used it to say, well, if we go, they don't. If they go, we don't. Such a thing. So the irony is only in the difference of attitude, where the Meraglim themselves have such a negative outlook on everything that their perspective was worthless and they deserve to be punished. And in this particular way, they deserve to suffer and see what a great land Eretz Yisrael is and what a beautiful promise Hashem kept. At the same time, with Moshe and Aaron, they're tzaddikim on such a high level that the last thing they want to give up on, the one thing they value more than anything else, is actually what they end up cashing their chips on, where they say, if it's us, but then the Jewish nation is likely to be punished because even inanimate objects can obey the word of God and His prophets, and you as people, as free-thinking, freely acting people, never listen to what I tell you. So they're sacrificing something that was super important to them, according to the understanding that they did this on purpose. And they did it on purpose because for them, it was the ultimate sacrifice they could make for the one thing that's even more important than Eretz Yisrael, which is Am Yisrael. So the entire nation wouldn't have to be executed. We wouldn't have to start from scratch. Moshe says, I've spent my whole life advocating for Eretz Yisrael. Why? Because the Jewish nation is the most precious nation on the face of the earth. They have beautiful, precious neshamot, and there's no way that I can withhold this from them. I would rather lose it and have them get in. Because for him, the Jewish nation always was priority number one. And so he gives up on something super important, all in order to gain something even more super important, which is this nation making it to Israel, this nation figuring it out, having kids, the tribes growing, striking roots in the land, and then ultimately that he was punished for what was potentially, at least, the lack of disobedience. That's the more Kabbalistically inclined interpretation. This is Zohar and some of the Kabbalists. That he knew what he was giving up on, but he did it in such a way, as heart-rending as it is, he only gave up on Eretz Yisrael, which is super precious to him, because Am Yisrael is even more precious to him. The Meraglim were the exact opposite. They wanted positions of prominence. They refused to lose their positions of prominence by us moving into Israel, and maybe the average level in the nation going up, but their individual prominence and importance going down. And so because they valued themselves more than they value Am Yisrael, and certainly a lot more than they value Eretz Yisrael, they denigrate the two latter and end up losing out on an opportunity to go in. Moshe, who is genuinely humble, truly humble, and whose only desire is to help Am Yisrael get where they need to be and raise their level, he makes the ultimate sacrifice because the Jews surviving and entering Israel was for him an even bigger project, an even bigger plan. So according to the Kabbalistic understanding, he proactively opted out and said, go ahead, punish me, I'm willing to face whatever punishment you give me for not, doing what you told me to do, which isn't to say that I lack respect for you, Hashem, or for the Jewish nation, or for the land of Israel. And ultimately he succeeded. The nation did enter where he himself couldn't, but he put them in front of, in front of him.
That they were never going to be able to stay there because they were, they weren't allowed to be able to do them.
It sounds, the Zohar says the same thing about Shlomo Melech, that he knew when he built Beit HaMikdash they would ultimately be destroyed. It wasn't going to last forever, and he did it anyway. Maybe there's something to be said for these temporary understandings being valuable. Did he know the Jewish nation was going to worship Avodah Zarah? Yes. Parshat Ha'azinu says it explicitly. While I was alive, you worshipped idolatry. Don't tell me it's going to stop after I'm dead. And then he himself, knowing the Jewish nation wouldn't stay at the peak of its game for very long, makes this sacrifice because, much unlike the Meraglim, he is humble enough to take himself out of the equation. And they made themselves the entire equation, which is why the equation failed. Very fascinating. Sometimes you see a tzaddik who's suffering, a rasha who has it well, or you see a tzaddik and a rasha who are suffering. They say, "Tov, that's this week's midrash. The righteous, the wicked, it's all the same thing." The answer goes back to what I said when we were learning about Moran Nevuchim, the Rambam, the guide to the perplexed. You cannot judge people. You can't judge people's behavior, because the presidential candidates are all crazy and they all deserve to have it said. It's not that you're not allowed to judge people's behaviors, their attitudes, their approach. You can't judge from the circumstances, the situations of their lives, what they merit and what they don't. Maybe you lost out on something because it was unimportant to you, and Hashem gave it to someone who valued it more. maybe lose out on something because it's super important to you, but for whatever reason it's not good for you, or it's in order to make room for something more important. What you can't do is draw conclusions from the fact that something happened. You won't distinguish between tzaddik and rasha by looking at it that way. So, we went a little bit late tonight. I'm sorry. With God's help, we will pick it up from here next week. Sure.